let's talk about capturing movement. And how I want to start off the part of this section is with this quote because I feel like it encompasses what we're talking about so perfectly. A still photograph is called a still photograph because the picture doesn't move, not because the objects in the picture are not in motion. The photographer's mission, should he or she decide to accept it, is to capture motion with stillness. Vincent Versace. So, what I love about this quote and why it is so important is that just because we are photographing something that is a still frame doesn't mean that our photograph is this flat object. There are things happening. There's energy in the photograph. There's life in the photograph. And there is movement, hopefully, happening in that photograph. Whether that movement is actual movement, like in this example, having the maple syrup drizzle down, or whether the photograph has implied movement, or sort of the illusion of movement without any movement taking place. So we're going to talk about those two types of movement, this first being captured movement and the second being implied movement. Captured movement is movement within your photo of a portion of your subject. This is you taking a photo of an object that is in motion, and then with the snap of your photo, you freeze frame that motion. In this example, we have a dusting of powdered sugar that is obviously going from this sifter onto this crepe cake. And now we know, because we live in the world, it's not as if this powdered sugar is just hanging out in the ether, in space. This powdered sugar was falling from top to bottom. So this is captured movement. When we have captured movement, our eye likes to follow that movement. It's naturally what our eye wants to do because we're used to seeing it in motion. So our eye is going to follow wherever that motion is, up and down and up and down. If the actual movement is left to right, it's going to follow it left, right, left, right. But our eye is going to move down and up or around or circling or whatever it is in our photo. Now, what is so fascinating about captured movement is it can create this energy in a photo and it can guide your eye around a frame. So what I'm seeing here is our movement starts at the sifter. So when I look at this photo, my eye first goes to the sifter. And then from there, it goes up and down and up and down. And it travels in this trajectory following the line of the powdered sugar. And maybe my eye will go down a little bit and then it might veer out and look at sort of some of the gooey layers of this crepe cake. But then it'll come back and it'll go up and down and up and down. And then maybe it goes all the way down and sees the powdered sugar that's fallen onto the marble at the bottom. But then it follows it back up and down and up and down. So you can think of captured movement as very much this highway for your eye to travel along. And you keep coming back to it. Even if you get off at one exit, you're on a journey. You got to get back onto the highway and keep going. So this is such a phenomenal way to add intrigue to your photo, as I said, to add energy and to give your eye something to do. Now, within this photo, there is what I like to call a secondary lead. This is basically something that is pushing us into that highway, that movement that's taking place. In this case, my hand is pushing us into the sifter, and then the sifter starts us along on this motion going up and down and up and down. And I want to bring up this point of secondary leads because I want you guys to keep that in mind as you're photographing. Sometimes it's completely enough to just have captured movement taking place, but it can also be nice to incorporate these secondary elements into your photographs that really start to sort of push you along and push you into that movement happening in your photo. Here's another example of an actual part of this photo moving. In this case, it is the honey drizzling. And you'll see there's no secondary lead here because we're not seeing something push us into this drizzle of honey because that happens out of frame. But nonetheless, we have this beautiful movement taking place of the honey coming from top to bottom. So your eye goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And what that does really is it makes it so this negative space up at the top of our photo, which otherwise would just have nothing happening in it, it would be pretty flat. Now all of a sudden it serves a purpose. It serves a purpose as this place where our eye goes up and down on the drool or the drizzle. I don't want to say drool, the drizzle of this honey. A third example of captured movement is this s'mores cookie being pulled apart. So here we are seeing the marshmallow being pulled from left to right. So our captured movement is taking us in this, quarter width of this frame from left to right, from left to right, from left to right. So my eye is going left, right, left, right. Maybe it goes left, maybe it goes up and looks around at those cookies in the background, but then it comes back. And it goes left, right, left, right, left, right. So in having these pieces of captured movement, we are literally creating something for our eye to do within this still frame. The second type of movement that we are going to talk about is implied movement. So this is the illusion of movement in a photograph without any actual movement taking place. So whereas with captured movement, we had something moving around in our photograph and we caught it midair. We took a snap of our photo and that thing that was moving turned into something freeze framed. With implied movement, nothing's actually moving to begin with. However, our eye is doing this same dance where it is being guided around a photo. So how does our eye get guided around a photo? Well, it happens with three things. And the first of those three things is directional lines. So these are lines created in a photo that push your eye to a specific point in a photo. To me, when I look at this photo, my eye keeps getting pushed into that middle slice of cake. And why is that? Well, for one, it's because we have these two main directional lines. The first directional line is this lower fork that you're seeing, and it is angled so that fork is creating a actual line that guides our eye into that middle piece of cake. The second directional line is this negative space created on the top between the cake itself and that one slice of cake on the cooling rack where there is some negative space in between. And that is a line that is also directly pushing our eye into this middle slice of cake. So you can use directional lines in order to highlight a specific area. So for example, if you had seen me styling this photo, I probably would have decided, all right, I want to focus on one of these slices of cake. Let's make it the middle slice of cake. Then I would have taken that lower slice of cake. I would have angled that fork so that it perpendicularly cut into this middle slice of cake. Similarly, I would have spun my big whole cake on that cooling rack so that that negative space between the full cake and that one slice being taken out angled us into that middle cake. So directional lines are very powerful, but you need to be very aware of them, and you want to make sure that you are moving objects around in your scene to lead you to where you want your eye to go. So if I wasn't thinking about directional lines, this fork on the bottom part or the bottom plate, I could have had that tilted, instead of tilted towards, let's say, like 1 o'clock on a clock, how it is now, could have had that fork tilted completely horizontally from 3 to 9 o'clock. And then we would have lost that implied movement that pushes our eye up into that middle slice of cake. Here's another example of directional lines. You can see that both the lines that the hands are creating and the line of that very rectangular dish is pushing us into this main bronzino dish in the middle of our scene. So by having these directional lines all pushing us in one direction, our eye has somewhere to land. And in addition to our eye having somewhere to land, there's now all of this energy happening in our photo. Our eye is going from the total bottom right corner diagonally inward towards the middle. Our eye is going from the total upwards right corner down into the middle. There's a journey again for our eye to go on. Applied movement can also happen in the form of repetition. When we have objects that are repeating, such as here, these wine glasses, and also in even more of the background, these chairs, those repeating lines create a not real actual movement happening, but kind of like a barrier or a line that pushes us into the middle even more. So, one way that you can think about repetition is making sure that when something is repeating, the pattern that it is creating actually makes sense for your photo. For example, this is in a circular cast iron. I thought, how fun would it be to have all of these tater tots repeat that same circular pattern, because it's going to reinforce that implied movement of our eye going around and around and around within this pan. The third term I want you to know when it comes to implied movement is this idea of object placement, which basically means that based on where you place your object in your scene, that can influence the movement that is happening. In this example, we have this cocktail, which is our main subject, and I've decided to place this cocktail so that it completely bisects this diagonal line, which is a very strong line that basically cuts our photo in half. So even though no movement is taking place in this scene, by putting our cocktail so that it sort of like overlaps or makes it so we can't fully see that line, we now have this implied movement of this line actually bringing us into this cocktail. What I want you to know about object placement is that it can affect the implied movement that we are seeing in our photo. Now, yes, absolutely, we probably still would have seen this very strong geometry happening in our photo if this cocktail weren't placed right on the edge of this table, but having the cocktail come in front of that line has turned that line into a directional line, a line that directs us someplace, and in this case, towards our main subject, our cocktail. So I want you to pay attention to your object placement and how you put items around your scene, and how in placing different objects you can create directional lines that in turn create implied movement. In this last example, we are seeing all of these forms of implied movement working together. We have directional lines in terms of the utensils themselves pushing us into the center of our frame. And they're also repeating. We're seeing them over and over and over again in this very linear geometric movement that is being created, going from top to bottom and bottom to top, that's leading us into the centerpiece. And then in terms of the way that the actual objects themselves are placed, they're placed in a way where it is pushing our eye into the center of this frame. When it comes down to movement, whether it's implied or actual, movement is incredibly important in helping to guide our eye around our frame. And not only that, having movement in your photo can create a much more dynamic and a more interesting scene. So play around with this next time you're photographing. If you're photographing something that has utensils, pay attention to the directional lines that those utensils create. If you are doing something with multiple objects, pay attention to the pattern that those objects create as they repeat around your scene. If you are playing around with actual movement, whether it's a drip or a drizzle or a dust, pay attention to where that actual movement is taking place, where it is pushing your eye around that scene, And even if you need a sort of secondary lead or something pushing you into that movement that pushes you around that scene.